Hello, I'm Chris. Come on into the Enola Frost Studio Workshop today. I am going to be sharing with you a little crafty project. This is how it looks now that I'm finished with it. But my focus is on showing you how you can use other tools that you might have in your craft room to use in your gel printing. And so what we're going to be using today are embossing folders and stencils. So I'm going to show you how you can reuse and get more bang for your buck out of those items and devote some of that to your joy of gel printing. And then, like I like to do whenever I think about it, is offer something that you can do with all those gel prints, because we tend to collect them and sometimes they're just so pretty to look at. You don't think about actually turning them into something that you can also use. So that's what we're doing today. Come on in. Thanks for joining me. I'm getting my Sizzix Big Shot set up to do some embossing. First, I'm going to be using an embossing folder. It's a 2D folder, so I need to arrange my plates. With so many different kinds of embossing folders these days, you really have to test out. These two that I'm using are old Cuttlebug folders from Provocraft, and I'm going to use some really sturdy watercolor paper to emboss. I've trimmed them down so they're a manageable size. They're small, in fact, even compared to the embossing folders. So I'm going to emboss the Houndstooth one, and then I also have the Dotty one. I have no idea what the names of these embossing folders are. You see a nice imprint, and this technique can be done with 3D embossing folders as well. These were just the designs that I wanted today. Now I'm going to need to do a little more adjusting of my plates because I want to dry emboss using some stencils. So you definitely need that adapter plate back in there because you don't have the same thickness. And as you watch me do these couple of designs, I think one is from the Crafter's Workshop, and I am not sure about the other one. The circle one is the Crafter's Workshop, and this lined one is the one that I'm not sure about. I'll see if I can track it down. Again, I'm using that same watercolor paper. I missed it, and actually I probably need a new mister because it just came out in big glops of water, but it still worked. It worked out just fine. And you can see I'm struggling with my plates, so here I go. I'm shifting them again. And this isn't very interesting to watch since the rubber embossing plate is on the top of everything else. You can't see what I'm doing. But here's a little proof. This one was the least effective, but it still worked moderately. So I continued and went on to my little circles. This one came out great. So I think it just has to do with the fact that that other stencil was quite thin compared even to this one. I was really committed now that I wanted a good impression, so I ran it forward and backwards, and it paid off. It gave me a nice impression the second time. So here are my 3 watercolor paper embossed sheets, and I'm going to be using them to help me decorate this tin. So this is a tin of some Christmas cookies that I had, and I don't know if you're like me, but I hate to waste a good tin. I like metal. And in fact, I'm needing some containers to hold pens and brushes and things like that. So it seemed like a good opportunity. Now I'm working on the lid as well. I'm gessoing here with Liquitex white gesso. I'm doing both the lid and the can in case I want to use the lid. I was suspicious that it might not fit on again once I finished collaging, and I was right. So I have the lid is sort of an extra, but I'm simply giving it a decent cover, nothing fancy, and preparing it to grab on a little better to my matte medium that I'm going to use to adhere my collage pieces. I want to work to add additional interest to these previously pulled prints. These top three I did using a technique with rubbing alcohol and water, and they're perfectly lovely. I like them just as they are, but in the project I'm going to do, I thought maybe it would be good to unify them a little more. So I'm going to do that by adding some additional gel printing onto them. This is my 4-inch brayer that I got from Amazon. I can link that down below. It's a really good one. I like it. And I'm just using 2 colors of paint today. I'm using the Liquitex Basics acrylic in titanium white and Prussian blue hue. So for my first print, I'm going to use white on top of a somewhat darker print. Rolling on my titanium white, trying to get it thin, but I wish I would have thought to, let's say, dilute the color a little bit. It really covered very, very well, and I think I would have liked it to have been a little more transparent. But we're going to start with the Houndstooth, and look how fabulously this watercolor paper picks up the paint from the gel plate. Oh, that just shows that pattern so well. And you can just keep using it. So you see, I get many uses out of this one piece of watercolor cardstock during this project. And then at the very end, I will show you a bonus use for the temporary mark makers. Here I'm using the one that didn't imprint as deeply, and it really ends up just leaving something interesting on the plate. Now, this first time I wasn't thinking about how long it was taking me, so I was concerned it would be too dry to pick up. So I'm doing the technique where I use matte medium, which is transparent. I roll this out over the white paint, and by giving another damp paint, I know it will pick up. So I'm using parts of a couple of different prints, one that I'm not as interested in, the more green print. You can see I reuse papers a great deal. I'm a teacher, and if I have bad copies, I'm going to try to give them another life. Now I thought I would use the darker Prussian blue hue on a lighter color print. And so this is just my way of unifying things a little more, adding light to dark and then dark to light. So we're using the dots, the circles, the, I don't know, labels. It looks like all kinds of different things. I really, really like this little embossing folder. And as I mentioned before, it's sort of old school. It's just a 2D but 2D works very well, and it's pretty predictable when you use it in this fashion. Those were my little circles. I pressed unevenly and it took off more than I would have. You notice that time I worked quite a lot faster so that I would be able to lay the paper down and pick it up right away. And I'm happy to report that it did work. So I smoothed it out and I used my heat tool for a brief amount of time and then went and picked it up. And this is my favorite gel print of the day. So now I'm working on more of a mid-tone, and I'm also going to make more of a mid-tone design on the gel plate right now by mixing my Prussian blue hue and my titanium white together, giving it a little circular motion on the plate so some of it blends in better, but I'm not taking care to give it a one solid color. You can see I'm rolling off on the side because I use some white craft paper to cover my glass plate. And it's nice because it allows me to do something like that, just roll off quickly without having a separate item to roll on. These are not coming up as well this time, and I'm not sure if it's because there was already some paint on those, or if I maybe waited a little bit too long since that area was where I initially mixed my paint. But it doesn't matter because these are all collage pieces. So you see I'm mixed and matched. Some here I have the dots as well as the houndstooth, and I'm putting them on the more what's that word? Turquoise background, or teal perhaps. I'm honestly not clear on the difference between turquoise and teal. Here is the pull. There's a lot of variation in this one. Not great pattern. Not great pattern on this one. Like I said, it didn't pick up as much paint. Here you just see me trimming off the edges. I want to see what the area I have to work with is because of the height of the tin. Just giving it a trim. Oh, yes, I love that print. It's my favorite. Okay, the one print I am not that happy with, the last one that I pulled, there's really not a lot of variation in it. But as I said before, the white covered more than I wanted it to cover. So this time I'm mixing some of the Liquitex Basics iridescent white with a little bit of matte medium. So I'm really just giving a little bit of shimmer to the print. I am going to use my textures to remove some of the paint. Hopefully it will give a little more variation, at least as you tilt the print. This time I'm using the side that's going to pull off more. The other one really only pulled off the circle shapes, and now I'm using the other side, which is pulling off the background. So this will result in really just a slightly iridescent pattern that you'll only see as you tilt the print. as I'm pulling it up, you will hardly be able to see any difference. But when I start to tilt it, you can definitely see the iridescence. I took my prints to the guillotine trimmer and trimmed some very irregular pieces because the prints were a nice size that they would fit the entire length of the tin. So now I'm using matte medium. This is from Nova Color, even though it's in the Liquitex jar. And I am very randomly placing these strips. I am trying to get them as vertical and as plumb, so to speak, as I can, using the catalyst wedge to press them down and make sure the edges make good contact. I'm just placing them on, seeing to it that the same gel print doesn't go next to another strip of that print. And this couldn't be more simple. I'm just working with vertical stripes. I love these colors. The patterns make the plain stripes a little more interesting, and altogether it makes a tin that I otherwise would have put in the recycling bin usable. I actually just finished using some similarly colored prints to make a cover for my work laptop. They're so boring. They're so boring, and I have a strategy of using removable contact paper to cover the back of it, and then I apply gesso and collage over the top of that. So I'm not in any way harming my work computer. I would never do that. They'd probably charge me for it, which is why I would never do that. So I'll have a matching but not matchy pencil cup, scissor cup, something like that, that I can set on my desk. You do need to be careful making decor with collage papers, because if you overrun your area with collaged items, I think that would be very hard on the eyeballs. That is not a style that many people can pull off. So I gave a quick trim around the top and the bottom, and everything is going to need to dry for a good long time because of the way I clean up my edges. As I said, I went ahead and I did the lid, and it was not a very thoughtful process. I just was trying to cover it up. I wasn't thinking about geometry really as I did this, and the trouble spots it was going to leave me. I should have cut these pieces longer so they would, and I should have overlapped them more so they would cover up the edges better. But just a little playing around, and it was fine. And as I said before, it doesn't really fit back on the tin, so I'm not going to be able to use it in that way anyway. They're not really going to be even seen together. Sort of creating, I don't know, reverse petals. Again, I'm just using each of the different patterns, and I'm trying to make sure that the same pattern isn't right next to another piece that has it. And I think it's around now that I start thinking, oh, when I fold those over, I'm going to need to do something so that it doesn't all bunch up. So I'm close to having the coverage that I need, but now I'm thinking about, oh, I'm gonna have to notch the edges of these so that I'm able to fold them down around the lip of the can. See a little patching up on my tin as I was doing the other. Just cleaning it up and pressing those edges down. Eventually I come in with a rubber band and I attach it on the bottom around the little lip that's there so that the paper really makes good contact with the tin, and that actually worked quite well to get it to adhere. So here we go, testing out how much bunching is there going to be, and I just start making some little triangular notches. And also thinking, oh, now I'm getting rid of the bulk here, but I've also left some open spaces that I'm somehow going to have to cover up. And I just cut out some little circles actually to mirror or repeat a little bit the curved edges on the top. Like I said, this is just extra footage really because it ends up not fitting as a lid. I think I may actually use it as a stand and just set the tall tin on top of it. The notches worked better than I could have even hoped, since I didn't plan for them at all. All right, so before I put the rubber band on the bottom, I actually used it on the lid because all of those little papers were sticking up in every direction, and it had a couple of grooves along it, so it really did need that extra pressure to adhere. These are rubber bands that I actually used to gel print with, so the first time I stretched it, little tiny pieces of paint flew all over my work area. And because I had sort of lost sensation from having paint on my fingertips, I was not in my best working state here. It was very near this time that I paused everything and went and gave my hands a bit of a soak and a good wash. I can usually get through an entire gel printing session without washing my hands, but I had just used my fingertips in ways that made it tough to keep working with them covered in paint. So I want those notched pieces to be adhered really well. I think I don't even cover up the open spaces on camera. Yeah, I didn't. So I just cut out some little circles and covered those spaces. Now, everything has been sitting for a couple of hours to dry, and this is one of my favorite ways to clean up the edges of collage. I use this obviously here on this metal tin, but I use it when I do art journaling in a children's board book. Those work really great because they have nice strong pages and they hold up very well to an emery board. I also do this if I have created a canvas. I go back after everything is really dry and I just lightly sand the extra pieces off with an emery board. This one's a little heavier duty. It came in a press on gel sticker nail kit, something that if you ever look at my hands, you can see I am not still using. I just can't make fingernails work for me. But as I was filing that, it definitely revealed some of the red edge, and I could have painted it, but paint would have added some additional texture and additional depth, and I was still a little bit hopeful that the lid was going to fit on. So instead I got out my Magnum Sharpie marker and just touched it up. I figured that would add much less dimension to those pieces. Plus it was a lot quicker because I didn't have to wait for it to dry again. Just gave a little cohesiveness as well. I did it around the edge of the lid, and here it kind of looks like the lid fits until you see that the lid doesn't fit, and there's nothing I can do to make that fit. I'm looking, I'm thinking, no, maybe it will be a base. So here is the bonus. Once I finished with my embossed paper, I just kept using it for a while to get lots of good stuff on the background, and I turned those into some greeting cards.